Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome everybody to the Woke with Wudu channel. This is the first video. We're just gonna jump right into it. No introduction to the channel whatsoever. We're gonna talk about this guy who's supposedly the new Nostradamus. He's been predicting a lot of things. Some of them have been coming true. The one that I know about most recently is that he predicted Trump would win the election in 2024. He also predicted a war with Iran, and he predicted that the US would lose the war. So let's get into this a little bit here. We're just going to watch this first video here. World War III is coming. I want to check out what he has to say here, and I also want to check out later on a longer video he has here about the whole Iran trap, the Iran war that he is predicting, which hasn't fully come to fruition, but Israel and Iran did fight, and then we also got involved. The U.S. got involved, so it's not a full-blown out war, but there was, a 12-day war there, seemingly likely going to come back for round two in the near future. So let's see, first of all, what he has to say here.
To drag this war out as long as possible.
Let's start from the
If
start.
there's a war in the Middle East, the entire world is dragged in because East Asia cannot survive without oil from the Middle East. And all Iran has to do is to close off the Strait of Hormuz, and they basically collapse the East Asian economies. The only way for Iran to win a conflict with the United States is if the United States sends in ground troops. You can't retreat now because then you look bad. And that's what Iran is trying to provoke. It's in Putin's best interest to drag this war out as long as possible because what he wants to do is bring in NATO. He wants to force NATO to commit ground troops in Odessa. The reason why is
our next guest has been dubbed by the media China's Nostradamus for having correctly called many geopolitical hotspot events, including the Iran-Israel war and how the U.S. would be involved. He also correctly called Trump's win way back last year. Take a listen.
As we also discussed, it's very likely that Trump will become president of the United States again in November, and he will pick Nikki Haley.
I mean, to be fair, picking Trump to win is not a huge prediction there. It's literally between two candidates.
As his VP. And that means
And
that Nikki
Kamala was
Haley
looking
will be the one
horrible.
in the Trump White House pushing for war against Iran.
Now he's making bold predictions on what's next
Nikki
for the
Haley's an
U.S.
interesting pick.
Iran conflict in the Middle East. What's next for U.S. involvement in the Middle East? Russia, Ukraine war. What's next for that front? What's Putin's real objective here? And what's next for the global economy and potentially a new third world war that could upend the entire global monetary system. He is Shujing Jiang, host of Predictive History on YouTube. Check out his channel. Very interesting.
This
Link
guy's
down
being a little
below.
bit positive. It could.
Jiang, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
It's
Thank you
pretty
for being
much
here.
likely to.
Thanks, David, for inviting me.
Jiang, let's start off with your first prediction that I mentioned. So you called Trump's win exactly a year ago before the election. But then back then you were calling for Nikki Haley to be VP, not JD Vance. Walk us through your analytical approach.
I hope it
And
was
ultimately
before the
how you
election.
called Trump's win.
Yeah, so I felt the 2020 election was very close, much closer than it should have been. And so I was trying to analyze the structural factors that made Trump so popular, including America's immigration policy, including America's focus on DEI, including America's wars overseas. And if you're not changing these structural factors, if you're not changing these structural issues, then Trump is always going to be a viable candidate. And then I was observing all this lawfare being conducted against Trump, which gave him a persecution complex, and which made him more popular in the eyes of racial minorities in the United States. And ultimately, the fact of the matter is that the Biden regime didn't really have a strategy, a plan, a vision for going forward. And then you had Putin's
Bingo.
invasion of Ukraine.
That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest difference. Trump always had messaging, always had a vision, always had a plan with him. The Democratic Party never had anything other than We got to stop Trump. That never panned out with any voters.
Which present a major geopolitical challenge for the United States. And again, Biden wasn't able to present a united front. He wasn't able to present a bold counter challenge to Putin. So I felt that you had a confluence of geopolitical, economic, and political factors that would ultimately let Trump win easily in 2024 if Biden stayed the candidate. And so that's how I made my analysis.
What was your reasoning for thinking that Nikki Haley would likely be VP?
So Trump, in order to become president, he needed to build a coalition of forces. So he's definitely had the people on his side. And then he needed certain factions of the government on his side, specifically.
Okay. Interesting.
The
Get
neocons.
back to it.
He needed to show the power faction in Washington, D.C., that he would support wars. And so Nikki Haley, in my opinion, was the best choice if you wanted to appease the neocons in Washington, D.C. And she really presented herself as neocon candidate during the Republican primary. So, and I felt that by picking Nikki Haley, then Trump would easily win the suburban woman vote, which would allow him to have a landslide.
Before we get to your next prediction, can you just tell us what is predictive history? How does it work?
Oh yeah, great question. Sorry. So I've studied a lot of history, and I felt that there was a common flaw to history being presented, which is they're not making predictions. If you're doing history properly, if you're analyzing history properly, if your analytical models are correct, then you should be able to project the future, make certain predictions about the future.
Yeah, this
And
guy's
if
talking
these
about
predictions
history
are
repeating
correct,
itself.
then you know your analytical model is correct. So the idea of predictive history is I want to make theories about history that allows me to make certain predictions about how the world will progress. And if these predictions are correct, then I know my analytical model is correct. But if these predictions are incorrect, then I know how to remedy or alter my analytical models in order to come closer to the truth. And I feel that if you do it this way, then history is much more accessible, it's much more clear, and it's much more useful for people. So that's the attitude, that's the approach to my understanding of history.
Can we use the same approach now and make a prediction for the midterm elections and what is likely going to happen?
So the problem with predictive history is you need to have a larger time horizon. So
Okay.
you would ask me like next year what's going to happen in the midterm elections, then it's very hard to say because you're not working enough. You don't have enough information. You don't have enough data to work with.
Because
So
it's only been 2 years in this term. Is that what you mean?
yeah, and also um, I mean the issue is that we assume that next year's midterm will be the same as every midterm that preceded this, right? But we're living in interesting times. It's entirely possible that there could be some discrepancies in elections in the midterm next year. There could be a lot of cheating. There could be some cancellations. There's a lot of different factors that you need to take in. So I can't really call the midterm elections. What the
Sure.
polls say is that the Democrats will take the House again, and that will immediately start impeachment hearings against Trump. But I'm sure Trump has counter strategies against that. So yeah.
Okay. Well, you've gained significant media attention for accurately calling the outcome of U.S. involvement in the Middle East in regards to Israel and Iran. You made these predictions a year ago, even at the time when a lot of analysts were saying that the U.S. might show restraint and would not get involved again. So went viral not because of the call itself, but because it contradicted a lot of mainstream analysis. So again, walk us through that process, and ultimately why you decided military intervention from the U.S. was inevitable.
Yeah. So the trick is to understand the significance of the assassination of General Soleimani in 2020, towards the end of the first Trump term. What you need to understand is that General Soleimani, he was the ambassador for Iran in negotiations with the United States, with the issue of
That was
Saudi
a top
Arabia.
war general for
And
Iran at the
when you
time.
assassinate an ambassador,
The top guy.
then it's basically a declaration of war. And
Yeah.
there are many historical precedents for this. The one that comes to mind immediately is in around the year 500 BCE, the Athenians and the Spartans assassinated the Persian ambassadors. And that's what launched the Persian invasion of the Greek mainland. So there's that historical parallel. There's that historical analogy. When you assassinate an ambassador, it's a declaration of war. And so I knew at that time when they did this that the United States basically declared war on Iran. And if Trump got a second term, if he won the election in 2020, then he would most certainly have sent in ground troops in the second term. But because he didn't, then the question then is, okay, well, would he win a second term? Because if he won a second term, then he would most definitely attack Iran. So the trick to analysis is to figure out the significance of that event and try to compare it to historical analogies. And if the historical analogies match, then you sort of know how the event will then proceed.
Before we continue, let me tell you about protecting your most important asset, your personal information. Now, your personal information, use it throughout, and you don't have to think about it. Go to joindeleteme.com, join Delete Me now, and take control of your privacy today. So at the time, Iran retaliated, quote unquote, by hitting some U.S. military bases in the Middle East.
So he's saying that was
out
just a
lot of active
sign.
personnel just to
That was a
show
declaration
that
of
they did
war
something without escalating the conflict.
that
And
we're
I
going to
think
escalate
where a lot
this.
of military analysts got it wrong was that they thought, okay, that was it. Iran did what they needed to do to show that they retaliated. No more escalations
Interesting.
are likely, at least from the U.S. side. Why ultimately did those analysts get it wrong?
Yeah, so I used a analytical model called game theory. Okay, and the idea of game theory is that there are different players in a game, and each player has a different worldview and a different optimal strategy in order to achieve his or her goals.
You're playing Risk.
So,
Play Risk in its game
according
theory.
to game theory, you do not assassinate someone's ambassador, because once you assassinate
Very
an
simplified version
ambassador,
of Risk,
then
but
you have to move quickly up the escalation ladder
very
into a
fun.
full-scale war. So Soleimani, I mean, like he's been there for over 10 years, and he was a de facto Iranian representative in the Middle East. So and he worked with Americans to contain ISIS. He worked with Americans to figure out how to best govern Iraq. So they were basically friends. And you need someone like that in order to maintain equilibrium in that region. So when you assassinate that sort of person, then you're unleashing complete unpredictable chaos. And why would you do that? Well, it's because you ultimately want to alter the geopolitical equilibrium in that region. And how do you do that? You do that by overthrowing the regime in Iran. And once you understand that, then you sort of understand that they're moving towards war. Then the question then is, why did Iran react so lightly, or why did Iran show
Let's say, hold on.
such restraint?
Forget Google. Why did Trump even do this? So let's see if ChatGPT will allow us. Withdrew. Well, yeah, I mean, the U.S. withdrew from that. Had nothing to do with Iran themselves. Try that. Was planning imminent attacks. Defensive action to prevent further violence or loss of American lives. Isn't it amazing how they go on the offensive? U.S. goes on the offensive and says it's a defensive move. That's amazing. Amazing posturing.
In the process. And the reason is because it's asymmetrical warfare, right? I mean, if Iran and the United States went on head to head, Iran loses all the time. So Iran needs to employ soft power. It needs to win the geopolitical public opinion. It needs to rally its allies. It basically needs to create a trap for the United States. So what we'll see for the next few years is the United States will constantly be the aggressor, and Iran will show restraint to show that it is the party of peace.
What does this trap look like? Let's say the U.S. falls into this trap over the next couple of years. What happens?
Yeah, so the only way for Iran to win a conflict with the United States is if the United States sends in ground troops. Okay, and there are many reasons why. Okay, the first reason is once you send in ground troops, then you are pot committed. You know, in poker, there's the term pot committed, right? You're all in basically. Um, Once you send in ground troops, there's something called the sunk cost fallacy that takes in, which is you've invested so much already in the process, you can't retreat now because then you look bad. So the breaking point or the tipping point is when the United States send in ground troops, and that's what Iran is trying to provoke. It's trying to set up conditions where the United States feels safe, it feels secure, and it feels necessary in order to send in ground troops. And once the United States commits ground troops, then the United States will lose the war against Iran.
They didn't lose the war against Iraq by committing ground troops. Well, not immediately. I mean, public fallout, that's a different story, right? So why would Iran be different?
That's a great point. So Iraq was a desert. Iran is mountainous. Iraq is the perfect place for America to employ its shock and awe military doctrine, right? Lots of planes, lots of special operations, quick lightning strikes against the command centers of Iraq. And it's because they were so successful in Iraq that the Americans will be led, because of its hubris, to attack Iran, thinking it's really the same situation. But the reality is that Iran, it's very mountainous. It's very hard to maintain supply chains in Iran. There are lots of choke points. You can't bomb mountains into submission. And Iran has learned a lot in the 20 years since America attacked Iraq. Iran has a pretty fleshed out strategy on how to deal with American ground invasion of Iran if it were to happen.
Yeah, double the population too of Iraq. But how likely is a ground invasion at this point?
But
I mean, you know,
nonetheless, if they
there's
control the sky, they
analysis
control the
that
sky. There's
Israel is
nothing they can
trying
do about
to
that.
uh,
If you control the sky,
persuade America to
not
lead a
only are
ground
you able to
coalition.
bomb
I
whatever
don't
you
know if that's
want,
true.
or
I'll let you assess that.
Yeah, so
have
I think
intelligence
anyone
via your drone
thinks that a
information.
ground invasion against Iran will be successful. Not even the Pentagon would
Yeah, a ground
argue
invasion would be difficult because of
that
the
a ground
mountainous region,
invasion
but
of Iran is strategic.
controlling the air
But
is
unfortunately,
still
there are
a
many
huge thing.
geopolitical factors, lots of geopolitical forces that are pushing the United States into regime change in Iran. Seymour Hersh on Substack, one of the great American journalists, but he has access to American intelligence operatives, and he's fully convinced that America is committed to regime change in Iran. And he's the same guy who, over 20 years ago, predicted that America is committed to regime change in Iraq. And this was like 6 months before the actual outbreak of the war. And this was a time when no one thought that America would go into Iraq. So Seymour Hersh is saying that America is committed to regime change. If you're committed to regime change, bombing is not enough. You need to send in ground troops. And I mean, the reality is that there's a lot of political discontent, economic discontent in America. And when that happens, then if all else fails, they take you to war. So, I mean, there are like millions and millions of reasons why I think they will send in ground troops. But I think that if you look at the geopolitical situation, just
There's
economic,
issues within
there's
America.
very little
Unite
choice
everybody by
for
going to
America
war.
but to exert
But
force in
That's
Iran.
not true
but Trump has
words.
said he doesn't want regime change. I mean, is this one of the instances where he's saying one thing and he wants the enemy to think the other? Or, I mean, so far he's been pretty consistent with his announcements. I'm just pointing it out.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll also point out that before he attacked Iran
Yeah,
last month, he did say that there will be a ceasefire. He did say
yeah,
that he
sure.
might left over the weekend, and then he went to bomb the Iranians over the weekend. So Trump has actually no credibility in the eyes of the Iranians.
Okay, fair enough. Well, what does this mean for the global geopolitical sphere? I think you've said that the coming conflict, correct me if I'm misquoting you, Jiang, but I think you've said that the coming conflict could be like World War III. It could destabilize entire fundamental global economic relationships. So what's next?
TikTok has a new feed, focuses on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. These are people not just explaining.
I don't know, man. Saying they can't take over Iran just because it's a mountainous region is a little bit, yeah. I don't know. I don't want to say far-fetched, but
Cut carbs to lose weight.
it's
Yeah, so it's I mean, it's very scary how these
an opinion.
conflicts around the world. You have the Russia-Ukraine conflict. You have the conflict between Israel and Iran. It's very scary how these events are converging together in the Middle East. And so, I mean, if there's a war in the Middle East, the entire world is dragged in because East Asia gets a third of its oil from the Middle East. Japan gets 90% of its oil from the Middle East. East Asia cannot survive without oil from the Middle East. And all Iran has to do is to close off the Strait of Hormuz, and they basically collapse the East Asian economies. So East Asia has to be brought in. Russia will be brought in order to defend Iran for many reasons, not just geopolitical, but also religious reasons. And I talk about this in my channel as well. Russia, Putin, they will protect Iran to a certain extent if there is an invasion. NATO will be brought in because the conflict in Ukraine will get worse and worse. And my prediction for the war in
He's
Ukraine,
not giving
right,
solid
is
reasons
that
here,
the
in
war
my
will shift to
opinion.
Odessa at some point. So the next big battle in the war in Ukraine is Odessa. And also what's really important is Odessa will be the last stand of NATO in Ukraine. NATO will commit its full might to defending Odessa. And if that happens, then Turkey will be
East Asia
brought
will
in
come in because of
Turkey,
oil?
Turkey controls the Bosphorus Strait, which gives NATO warships access to the Black Sea. But basically, if you just look at a map and you look at
You
what's
can just
happening
take it
in
from Russia.
Ukraine,
Russia's
what's
not selling
happening
to
in the Middle East, they believe
supposedly
that these conflicts will get worse and
not
worse, and
selling
at some point they'll converge together, and at some point the entire
to
world will be brought into this region.
the world as much as it was.
This is what Trump announced last week. Speaking of World War III and Russia, he threatened Russia with tariffs. He said,
Russia
if the
doesn't
war
have
is not
a military
concluded
pact
or a
with
deal
Iran that
to
says
end the
that they'll
war
come
not
to their
reached
aid if
within
they're
50 days,
attacked.
this was as
They
of
have
last
that
week,
with North
he will
Korea,
threaten Russia
but
with
not with
new
Iran.
tariffs by the order of up to 100%.
They have more
Okay, so
general
that's what he said.
military pacts with them to
Let
help
me
them
get your
out, but not
prediction
if
on
they're
what's going to happen in the
attacked.
next 50 days.
It's not like a NATO. If you're
I don't think
attacked, we're
anything will
coming
happen
to your help
in
you
those
out.
50 days because these tariffs don't really affect Russia. Russia is already heavily sanctioned by the West. The West
Well,
has.
Trump knows this. Why is he saying this then? Let's assume he agrees with you. This is
Um,
in game 3 here.
right. So Trump, he's a paid actor. I mean, his job, his role is to capture the imagination, the attention span of everyone in the world. So he's trying to create as much drama as possible. Also, by saying this, he's signaling to his NATO allies prepare for war, right? He's telling the Germans, the French, and the British, we're going to allow you to send more arms to Ukraine, and I'm going to give Putin these 50 days, um, but we all know what he's going to do. So let's get ready, guys. Let's prepare for war because now the onus is on you. The United States will probably focus on Iran, and NATO will be forced to focus on Ukraine.
So how long? I mean, we don't know for sure, but let's use your predictive history model. How long do you think this war in Ukraine can drag out at this point?
Right. So according to game theory analysis, it's in Putin's best interest to drag this war out as long as possible because he's winning the war. He has battlefield dominance. They're fighting the war on his terms. So what he wants to do is bring in NATO. He wants to force NATO to commit ground troops in Odessa. The reason why is if NATO were to do this, this would be extremely unpopular back in their home countries, especially Britain and France and Germany. And what Putin needs to do in order to win this war is to force regime change in these countries, Britain, France, and Germany. And you can do that either through political elections, but you can also do that through civil war. So Putin, if you wanted to win this game, then he wants to create as much tension between the political elite and the people as much as possible in these NATO countries. And the best way to do that is by dragging them into an unwinnable war. He doesn't have to beat these guys, but he just has to draw the war out.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to end on China and U.S. relations. So I'm curious to
That's
get your
very
analysis on
interesting.
how the trade war
Putin's
with China is
strategy is
going
to
to
just make
progress after
chaos,
most of the tariffs were taken off, and now we're back to a
prolong the
baseline
war so
level
that
of
chaos
tariffs. And ultimately,
ensues
the
in the
bigger
home
question is
countries.
Sino American relations under Trump, how that may evolve over the
Hmm.
next 3 years.
Yeah, so I think what's really important to understand is that China and the United States have been codependent, have been best friends basically for the past 30 years. When Xi Jinping came to power, this friendship came under a lot of strain. And the way I understand it is, according to game theory, what Trump and the American administration is trying to do is apply economic pressure on China so that the Xi regime becomes less and less popular, so he's forced to make economic concessions. So I think that at the end of the year, Trump will visit China, and I think that this will mark the beginning of a rapprochement between China and the United States. Ultimately, at the end of the day, China and the United States are dependent on each other. China needs access to American markets, American technology, and American financing. Right now, America has basically offshored its manufacturing base to China, and there's no replacement. They've been talking a long time about moving to Vietnam or Southeast Asia or India, but what most CEOs will tell you is there's really no replacing China. So I think we will move towards a rapprochement between China and America. All this is trying to make some important economic
That's
and
already
financial
happening right
concessions.
now.
It's basically Trump is trying to help Wall Street have more financial leverage over China, basically.
So the U.S. might still need China as their manufacturing base, but does China need the U.S. as an export base, or have they already during this time established other trading partners that can replace the U.S.?
I mean, the reality is you have 200,000 Chinese students studying in America. And so it's not just about financing, it's about soft power. It's Chinese are attracted to the American dream. And these past 10 years, I work in the Chinese education system. These past 10 years, the Chinese government has been trying to encourage Chinese students to go study somewhere else or even stay in the country. It doesn't work. Like the more restraints you place on families who want to send their kids abroad, the more desperate they become. So it's not just about economics. I mean, it's a lot of it is just appeal. And the Chinese dream, the Chinese dream is to make as much money as you can so that you can move your money and your family to America.
that was the dream 20, 30 years ago. Is it still the
It,
dream, Jiang?
it's even more true today.
Wow. Okay. So everyone telling me, "Hey, move east, young man." That's not true.
I wouldn't do it, but
Okay.
yeah.
Jiang, it was a great first introductory call. Thank you very much for the interview. Where can we follow your work and learn more from you in the meantime?
Yeah, so I'm on as you say the YouTube channel. So that's the best place to follow my work there.
Okay, we'll put the link down below, so make sure to follow Jiang's channel. It's a great channel. It's called Predictive History. He goes into a lot more detail. So
That's
we'll
his
speak
own
to you again
channel.
next time about other topics. Thank you, Jiang, for coming on the show today.
Thanks, David. Great talk. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching.
Yeah, subscribe to that. Very interesting. I don't know about his analysis there on Russia. Just trying to prolong the war to make chaos in the home countries. I mean, is it really going to lead to civil war? Like, I don't think that's going to go that far. Let's see about this Iran. I'm very interested about this. Let's get into this. This is going to be over an hour long here.
Okay, let's start class. So let us summarize and review where we are so far in the story. So there
This
are
was
three major
a
interests
year ago.
forces that are pushing the United States towards war with Iran. The first is
Just to stop him real quick. Again, this guy predicted that Trump would win the election 2024. Then he predicted that the U.S. would go to war with Iran, and he predicted that the U.S. would lose that war. And this is him pretty much explaining the U.S.-Iran war that he's predicting, which we know what already happened this month.
the Israel
And it's
lobby.
likely to resume
Remember that the Israel lobby
later on
is
this year.
composed of both Jewish interests as well as Christian interests, right? Representing the Jewish interest is something called APAC. And they have a membership.
Apologies
of
for
about
my internet. I see it's been
800,000.
going out a few times. Try to get
But
that up
they're very wealthy. There are many
by
billionaires
tomorrow.
in this group. So this group has financial power. In fact, APAC is considered the second most powerful lobbying organization in the United States. The first is the pensioners, okay? There's about 30 million of them. And their lobbying organization is the most powerful. But APAC is second.
What did he
But
say?
also in the Israel lobby are the Christian Zionists, right? So for example, the organization Christians United
It's the number
for
one? What did he say? I didn't even hear
has
him.
7 million people
Pensioners?
in its membership. So together, the Christian Zionists and APAC are extremely powerful force.
John Mearsheimer
in the
has something to
region.
say
They
about that.
want a war in the Middle East in order to advance Israel's interests. Also remember that America is now addicted to empire, because empire represents easy money. All money has to be channeled through the U.S. And so there are many people in the U.S. who just basically make their money by speculating on money, okay? So for example, Wall Street. And that has made Wall Street extremely powerful right now in U.S. politics. And the third force is Saudi Arabia. Remember that in our discussion of Saudi Arabia, we learned that the major conflict in the Middle East is actually not between Israel and Iran, but between Saudi Arabia and Iran. For Israel, Iran is a security threat because it supports Hezbollah and Hamas. But for Saudi Arabia, Iran represents a threat to its very existence. Right? So Saudi Arabia must resolve the Iran problem soon. Right? Now, how these three forces manifest themselves is
I think that's overblown.
Okay, so basically Trump is their champion. And privately, there's a man named Jared Kushner, who is Trump's son-in-law. He's married to.
You're not going to have
Trump's
Iran
daughter,
attack Saudi Arabia. That'd be crazy of them to do.
Trump, okay? And
You have Mecca
Jared
and Medina in there.
Kushner
You're going to attack the
happens to be very good friends with both
country that
Benjamin
hosts
Netanyahu, who is the leader of
the
Israel,
most
as well as
important
Mohammed bin
areas
Salman,
for us
who's the
Muslims.
leader of Saudi Arabia. Now,
It's just
Jared Kushner's
suiciding
father,
yourself,
Kushner,
essentially.
was a very prominent sponsor of AIPAC. In fact, when Benjamin Netanyahu comes to stay in the United States, he lives with the Kushner family. So one night, Benjamin Netanyahu had to stay in Jared Kushner's bedroom, and Jared Kushner had to sleep in the basement. Okay, that's how close they are. And Jared Kushner is friendly with MBS, the leader of Saudi Arabia, so friendly that when Jared Kushner started a private equity fund, Saudi Arabia invested $2 billion. Okay? So through Jared Kushner, these three forces are able to exert influence on Trump. As we also discussed, it's very likely that Trump will become president of the United States again in November, and he will pick Nikki Haley as his VP. And that means that Nikki Haley will be the one in the Trump White House pushing for war against Iran. As we discussed, Nikki Haley makes most of her money from the Israel lobby, okay? The anti-Iran lobby. We know from the first Trump administration that these forces are able to exert tremendous influence on Trump, okay? And the evidence is, one, Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal that would have secured peace between the United States and Iran, okay? Trump moved the United States embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Israel, which was a major, which caused major friction.
Horrible move.
Okay?
Horrible
We
move.
also know that Trump ignored the fact that MBS killed a journalist. Okay? So we also know that Trump has been very friendly with Saudi Arabia. We also know that Trump sponsored the Abraham Accords, which is trying to bring peace between Israel and other Arab countries and unite them against Iran. Okay? The last thing that Trump
with
did,
that
which is
country.
most important,
It's
is
impossible.
that in January 2020, Trump ordered the assassination.
It's impossible to have peace with somebody to use to bomb you.
Qasem Soleimani, who is the leader of the who is the leader of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Okay? So from all this, we can suspect that in a second Trump term, war with Iran will be a major priority. So is this clear so far? All right. Now, we also discussed that, okay, even though there are these forces that want war with Iran, ultimately it is the U.S. military that must implement this war. And if the U.S. military refuses to go to war, then the war can't happen. So we discussed that, unfortunately, the U.S. military is very different from what it was 30 years ago. Okay? 30 years ago, the U.S. military maintained very standard military doctrine. Okay? They maintain three very important principles that all militaries must maintain in a time of war. The first is mass forces. B is avoid encirclement, right? And the third is protect supply lines. Now, the important idea is that when you fight a war like this, okay, which is traditional warfare, you must have the consent of the public, okay? Because it is the public that sends soldiers, that provides money, that gives you political support. But in 2003, the U.S. military changed its military doctrine to one of shock and awe. Okay? And what shock and awe means is that you don't have to follow these three principles anymore. You can use air supremacy. You also have technological omniscience. And you also have special forces. And this allows you to fight wars cheaply, quickly, and decisively so that you no longer need public political support for fighting wars. And as we also discussed, this created the idea of hubris in the American military. So the American military, because of the 2003 war in Iraq, are confident they can win any war, any place, against any enemy. We know that this doctrine is actually not true. And we know because of something called Operation Prosperity Guardian. Okay? So a few months ago, the Houthis, which are a rebel group in Yemen, they started to attack ships in the Red Sea. Okay? And a lot of trade goes through the Red Sea. So the American military dispatched a massive naval force against the Houthis. Were the Americans able to defeat the Houthis? No, they were not. And so what are the Americans going to do about it? What can they do about the Houthis? What's the solution to this problem? You have these pirates, the Houthis, going around and attacking these ships, which is affecting international commerce. And that's why inflation is such a huge problem right now in the world. So what's the American military going to do about this? What can they do about this? The answer is nothing. Okay? The American military has no solution. Why? Because they don't have the forces necessary in order to undertake an operation against the Houthis. They have special forces, they have air supremacy, and they have technological omniscience, satellites, but they don't have infantry. They don't have lots and lots of ships. Therefore, they cannot stop the Houthis. Okay? And what's really important is that Joe Biden has come out and said that, yes, we know we are losing the war in the Red Sea, and yes, we know that we cannot stop the Houthis, but we are going to continue on this path. Okay? Does that make sense? This is the idea of hubris. Not knowing your limitations. And when you are faced with your limitations, you refuse to accept your limitations. Okay? And that's why when the U.S. military is given the order to invade Iran, they'll probably go along with it because they cannot imagine the possibility that they could be defeated in Iran. Okay? And then you have the Iran Revolutionary Corps, okay? The Revolutionary Guard. And as we discussed last class, they want war with the United States because they're very angry about U.S. interference in Iran, right? So during the Shah regime, which was a brutal police state from 1953 until 1979, the Americans were the ones who were backing this police state. So there are many who are angry about this.
I mean, with the Houthis,
They're
the
also
U.S. can just keep
angry
air
about the
supremacy,
fact that
keep
the
drones
U.S.
up top,
continues to protect Israel
that
and Saudi
send missiles,
Arabia.
shoot missiles down whenever the
And they're
Houthis are
also
going to go
angry
in
about the
the
fact that
sea.
Trump killed
Why not
General
just keep
Soleimani.
that?
Okay? And as we discussed, it's possible that the Revolutionary Guard Corps killed last week the president of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi, because he was preventing war. Okay? So they want war with the United States. So you see the map, right? You see the logic of this, where there are powerful forces in the United States pushing the United States towards war. You have Trump, who has basically agreed in his first term to raise or increase escalation with Iran. Within the Trump White House, there'll be Jared Kushner and Nikki Haley to push this war, both privately and publicly. The U.S. military has so much hubris that they think they can win this war, and Iran wants to provoke the United States into invading it. Okay? And the United States and Iran can have many, so Iran has many strategies in order to provoke the United States into war. Okay? Basically, the United States is looking for a reason, and Iran wants to give them a reason. And that's why I think war between the United States and Iran is very likely in the next 2 to 4 years. Okay, any questions so far? Are we clear about where we are so far before I move on? Any questions? Okay, so now let's talk about the actual war. So here, most of this is speculation, okay? But I'm using speculation in order to help us better understand what a war would look like, okay? So let's pretend that it's March 2027, okay? And Trump goes on TV. He announces Operation Iranian Freedom, a full-scale U.S. invasion of Iran, along with Israel, Saudi Arabia as its main partners, but the United Kingdom, UK will be involved, Australia will be involved, UAE will be involved, Poland will be involved. Okay, so you have many countries attacking Iran together. And Trump goes on TV and explains to the American public why the United States is fighting this war. Okay, and this is what Trump says. First, he says that for the past year, there have been violent protests in Iran. You have religious protests, you have political protests, you have ethnic protests. The Iranian people are sick of the Ayatollah. They are sick of the dictatorship. They want democracy. They want freedom. In response, the Revolutionary Guard are killing thousands of protesters. Iran is on the brink of civil war. Therefore, the United States has an obligation to protect the people of Iran. Okay? The people of Iran
You mean
are
America sees an
praying for
opportunity
freedom and democracy, and the United States, the world's greatest democracy,
to
must
use
give
those
them
people?
democracy. Okay? So the first reason is freedom and democracy. Second, U.S. intelligence, along with Israeli intelligence, have discovered that for the past 2 years, Iran has been working very, very hard on developing a nuclear bomb. In fact, Iran is only 1 month away from having 3 nuclear bombs.
Israel's been saying that for over 30
so
years.
that New York City, San Francisco, and Los Angeles could all be destroyed. Okay? So to prevent this, we must strike first to stop Iran's nuclear program. Okay? Third,
He's doing game theory from the U.S. perspective.
Iranian proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, many groups have been disrupting shipping in the Middle East, in both the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. 40% of the world's oil passes through that region, mainly to East Asia, China, Japan, South Korea. Our global prosperity is at stake. We must go to war to protect these shipping lanes and ensure that the oil goes to China, Japan, and South Korea so that they can continue their economic prosperity. So the United States, as the world hegemon, has a responsibility to protect global prosperity. Okay?
The Houthis aren't attacking every single ship, they're just attacking specific
Iran
ones.
has been launching
Linked directly to
attacks
Israel.
against our allies,
They
Saudi
were attacking
Arabia
American
and
ships.
Israel. Hezbollah has been violently attacking Israel, killing dozens
Any country that's
of
involved in
Israelis,
it,
innocent Israelis.
supporting Israel. That's
The
who they're
Houthis
targeting.
have been attacking Saudi Arabia oil fields, damaging the economy. We have an obligation to protect our allies, our friends in the Middle East, okay? And the last reason is we know for a fact that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is a sponsor of terrorism. Last week in a mall, there were gunmen who went and killed 107 people. Our intelligence says that it was most definitely an Iranian operation. Okay? So for these 5 reasons, we have decided to invade Iran. But don't worry, this invasion will be successful because we have a lot of allies. The UK, Israel, Saudi Arabia, all friends, will be part of this operation. Our special forces are already in the country looking for their air bases and their missiles. We can knock them out at the beginning of the war. Also, we have been in contact with Iranian opposition groups. They want to overthrow the regime. And when we help them, they will install democracy in the country. Our American military is the greatest in the world. In 1991, our military defeated Saddam Hussein.
He's hyping it up. He's hyping it up. He's gonna bring them down soon.
In 2003, our military defeated Saddam Hussein in less than 3 weeks. To prove that we are the greatest in the world, we will defeat Iran in only 2 weeks. So do not worry. We will be strong in protecting democracy, freedom, and global prosperity. Okay? So that's what Donald Trump will say to the people of the United States. Okay? And of course, you're going to have large-scale protests throughout the country opposing this war. But most people in the country will support this war. Okay? All right. So after the speech, the operation is launched.
A lot of people just simply are so ignorant.
On TV,
They have
we'll watch
no
this
clue
on
what
TV,
they're supporting.
on YouTube together, okay? And we'll be so impressed by the power of the U.S. military. This is Iran. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia. Israel is here. Red Sea is here. Iraq is here. Okay? So, in the Strait of Hormuz comes the USS Gerald R. Ford. It's a $13 billion super carrier. Okay? This thing is designed to destroy countries. It is now prowling the Strait of Hormuz to ensure that shipping is safe. America establishes air supremacy very quickly, okay? Meaning that it has complete control over the skies. Nothing can move in the skies without America detection, okay? And then a massive invasion force is sent to Iran.
This is where I think he makes a mistake.
100,000 U.S. troops land.
Controlling the air is not just about controlling the air and knowing what's happening in the air. Also means getting full intelligence on what's going down on the ground.
And they are about to strike Tehran.
Any troop movement, anything like that. You have recon planes all over, drones, giving you all that information.
Okay? All right. Do you understand what has happened? Okay. Now I want to ask you this question.
200,000 troops from Saudi Arabia? I don't think so. I don't think that will happen. I don't think Saudi Arabia is going to get involved in that.
Established air supremacy. It controls the skies. U.S. Navy controls the seas. You have 100,000 U.S. troops in country ready to strike Tehran. The war has been decided. Who has won the war? Okay, obviously this is a trick question. Obviously Iran has won the war. Why?
Let's see here.
Why? What's the problem with this plan? Okay? This is typical American doctrine, shock and awe. This is how they fight wars. But there's a problem with this plan. What is it? Why would the Iranians want this? Okay, let's go back to traditional military doctrine, okay? In traditional military doctrine, you have 3 principles, right? Mass forces, avoid encirclement, protect supply lines, okay? These are three things you must absolutely obey if you are going to war, okay? So using traditional military doctrine, explain to me why the United States has lost the war right now. Exactly. First of all, they're in circle, okay? Do you know why? Because Iran are all mountains. It's a fortress, okay? Meaning that to get these troops into the country, you have to airdrop them, right? But guys, once you're in the country, you can't get them out of the country. You understand? Okay, so that's the first problem. They've been encircled, right? What's the second problem?
Well, you wouldn't want to get them out of the country until the war is done.
Why not? That's right. And why else? Yeah, that's right, okay? So they failed to mass forces, okay? Iran is a population of 90 million people. You will need at least 3 to 4 million soldiers to even think about conquering the country. They've got 100,000 in this country, okay? And as Jack says, you can't move tanks through mountains. They're not designed for mountain warfare. What are you going to do? Okay? So they can't mass forces, and they've been encircled, and what else is a problem? And this is the biggest problem.
Supply lines.
Exactly. They cannot be resupplied, okay? They have no supply lines. For them to be resupplied, airplanes have to drop ammunition, food into the country.
The biggest thing here, though, is
Iran
he's
is
assuming
all
that
mountains.
this is the
It's very
situation. Could be already over by now.
the Iranians to shoot down the airplanes. Does that make sense? When you pass through mountains, you can't see what's on the ground. A random guy with a rocket launcher can just shoot down the helicopter, okay? Which is what the Afghans did against the Soviets in the Afghanistan war. And that's why the Soviets lost the war. A drone can take down any airplanes, okay? So, in other words, these guys are trapped. You think they're soldiers, but they're not. What they really are, hostages. Okay? Does that make sense? You have too many people in the country, so you can't get them out of the country, but you don't have enough people to actually launch a strike against Tehran. And you can't resupply them. And they've been encircled by Iranian forces. All right? Does that make sense? Okay? Okay. Now, the logic of having 100,000 U.S. troops in the country is that once in the country, all the resistance to the regime will rise up and strike against Tehran. The Iranian army will mutiny against the country. Okay? That's the hope. Why do we think this won't happen? Why won't the Iranians revolt against their government? Why don't they want to revolt? That's right. Okay, so Iranians hate Americans. Okay, remember that Iranians remember the Shah. From 1953 until 1979, the Shah, the American-supported Shah, was running a brutal police state. So brutal that everyone in Iran revolted against the regime. Okay, that's number one. Why else would the Iranians not support the Americans? Why? That's the first reason. Iran has a bad history with America. What else?
Israel, Iraq.
Guys, which country is next door? What happened in Iraq? America destroyed Iraq, right? From 2003 into 2011, America was there destroying the country. America said that it would bring freedom, democracy. It would bring prosperity. It would bring wealth. But instead, it just destroyed the country. American soldiers were running into houses every night, pointing guns at children, destroying homes, and arresting men for no reason, okay? Iranians saw all this on TV. They heard about all this from neighbors, okay? So they know that if America comes, it's to destroy the country, not to bring freedom, democracy, not to bring prosperity, it's to destroy the country. That's why they're going to fight, okay? And another reason is that Iranians think that they belong to a great civilization. So they value their freedom and independence. Okay, does that make sense? They're not going to submit to a foreign conqueror. So, why else would the Iranians resist? Okay. Also religion, right? The Iranians are religious. They believe that America is Satan, and they have a duty, a religious obligation to fight Satan, okay? So for many reasons, there's just no way that Iranian people are going to stand with America. You might have a minority, but most are going to resist, okay?
America is Satan.
Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so that's a great question. Why would the Americans think that the Iranian people will rise up? And the answer is that they need to justify the invasion. Does that make sense? They have to have a logical explanation for why this invasion will succeed. Because one of the criticisms against them will be like, you need 4 million people to invade Iran. They don't have 4 million soldiers. They have at most 1 million soldiers, okay, total throughout the world. They have about 60,000 in the Middle East. So they can't get 1 million soldiers. So the only explanation is, okay, well, we're going to pretend that once we invade, the people of Iran will support us. Do you understand? So it's not based on truth, but it's a explanation for why the invasion will succeed. Does that make sense? Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so that's their propaganda. But do they actually believe this? And the answer is hubris, okay? They do believe this because they have hubris. And again, it's hard because we're not in their position. But once you're in that position where you have access to nuclear weapons, when you can kill anyone in the world, when you can see everything in the world, it makes you think you're God. Okay? And we remember, like last semester, we were reading the Greeks. And the Greeks believe the worst thing is hubris. Because it makes you think you're God. But you're not God. And you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you think you're God. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Any more questions? Okay, so Trump says that Iran is 1 month from developing a nuclear bomb, right? America has been saying this for the past 10 years, okay? You just Google this, and America's like, oh, Iran is only 1 month away from a nuclear bomb. They've been saying this for the past 10 years. So do you understand? When Trump gives a speech, there's absolutely no evidence that
Israel has been saying that literally for 30 years.
This is how he'll explain the invasion.
Literally, Netanyahu himself has been saying that for 30 years.
Right? And chances are that even if Tehran possess a nuclear bomb, they won't use it. Why not? That's right. The reality is that there's only one way that America can win this war against Iran, okay? They can just nuke the country. And America will do that if it has enough, if it has a pretext, okay? So nuclear weapons is something that Iran is very afraid of, okay? So does it make sense? All right. So this becomes, so American soldiers are trapped in this country. Okay? So now the question then is, wait a minute here. Why would America do something so stupid as send 100,000 soldiers into the country for no reason and get them trapped? Okay? So that's a question. And what I want to do now is make you the argument that there are two ways that we can prove or provide evidence that this is true, okay? The first is historical analysis. Historical analysis means that are there historical examples like this? Okay? Are there historical analogs? If there are, then this could be true, okay? The second method is through game theory analysis. Why would the actors who are rational do something as stupid as trap 100,000 American soldiers in Iran? All right? So we'll first do historical analysis to find historical analogs, examples, sort of similar to this. And then we'll look at game theory. to try to reason out the motivation of the actors. Okay, so let's first look at game theory. Oh, sorry. Let's first look at historical analysis. Okay, so the year is 415 BCE, okay, in Athens. Remember that we studied Thucydides, the Peloponnesian War, last semester, okay? So we will now discuss the Peloponnesian War. The year is 415 BCE, and for the past 17 years, Athens have been fighting a brutal war against Sparta, okay? It's a stalemate. And then for whatever reason, a man named Alcibiades, okay, has a suggestion. Okay, and his suggestion is to win the war against Sparta, let's go invade Sicily. And Nicias, his opponent, is like, why the hell would we want to invade Sicily? It's far away. And Alcibiades is like, well, because it has a lot of money. And if we invade the country, we can take their money. Okay? And it turned out, by making this argument, the people of Athens really support this argument, okay? Because the reason why is war was costing them a lot of money. And they become addicted to the easy money of empire, okay? So they want to fight this war. So Nicias has this great idea of how to convince people not to go to war, okay? And what he says to the people is, okay, guys, I know you want to fight this war. I know that you think this war is a good idea, but Sicily is a huge place. It has a navy. Therefore, we need a massive expedition force against Syracuse and Sicily, okay? We need at least 5,000 soldiers. That's a lot, okay? Because the total Athenian population is about 50,000 people, okay? 5,000 soldiers is a lot for Athens. And we need about 100 ships. And the idea is Nicias is trying to scare people into not agreeing to not fight, okay? That's the idea. The Athenians say, that's a great idea. Let's send a massive force against Sicily and Syracuse so the war can be won just like that, okay? Shock and awe. So the problem, though, is that never before in its history has Athens sent a large expedition force against another power. Okay, does that make sense? When the Persians invaded, they were invading Athens. Athens didn't go invade Persia. So when you have sent a massive expedition force against another country, what is your number one problem? What is the thing that you must resolve? But the Athenians didn't really think about it because they had absolutely no experience in fighting a foreign war. Okay, so the enemy knows the terrain better than you do, okay? But there's actually a much bigger problem than that. And it is what? Okay, the biggest problem is resupply. And this is something that the Athenians didn't think about because they never never fought a war like this before, okay? So they sent this huge expedition against Sicily. And Syracuse, which was a naval power, were surprised because they were like, why would the Athenians want to invade us, okay? So for the first year, the Athenians were destroying the Syracuse army. And the Syracuse army had to retreat back into their city, okay? And so the Athenians laid siege to the city. Okay, the Athenians, Syracuse is here, the Athenians are here. And the Athenians control the sea, right? Okay? So this situation is very similar to this situation, okay? Do you understand? But then what happened was that the Athenians couldn't resupply themselves. And the reason why is Syracuse also had a navy, and they could stop the Athenian navy from resupplying the Athenian troops. And therefore, the Athenian army was wiped out in Sicily. And this caused the Athenians to ultimately lose the war against Sparta, and it caused the Athenian Empire to collapse. Okay? Do you understand? And again, historians have been trying to figure out for a long time why the Athenians would do such a stupid thing as to send a huge army against Syracuse, because the risk of failure was catastrophic. Okay? And the only answer is, well, the Athenians had hubris, okay? They never really lost the war, and they had become addicted to empire, which is the same situation America finds itself in today. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? All right? So this has happened before in history, when the Athenians invaded Sicily and lost to Syracuse. Their entire army was wiped out in Syracuse, okay? Because they couldn't resupply their army. Does that make sense? Right. The second example we can look at is the Vietnam War. So in the beginning of 1960, okay, the beginning of the decade, most Americans have never heard of a country called Vietnam. Okay? Most Americans didn't know what it was, didn't know where it was, okay? By the end of the decade, in 1969, 500,000 American soldiers were in the country, destroying everything, okay, but also getting destroyed themselves. 58,000 U.S. soldiers died in Vietnam. So the question then is, how did this happen? Why would this happen? 1960, Vietnam was a distant country no one's ever heard of. By the end of the decade, 500,000 U.S. soldiers were in country fighting this war against an enemy they really didn't know. Okay? In 1971, the Pentagon Papers came out. And the Pentagon Papers was a history of America's involvement in the Vietnam War dating back to the 1950s, okay? And it made three major points. The first point is that American leadership, military leadership, has been expanding the war in Vietnam without public knowledge, okay? This is what we call mission creep. So maybe at first they sent some observers to the country, then they sent some advisors, then trainers, then soldiers, okay? So mission creep. Slowly over time, things escalate. And you don't really understand why things escalate, but they do, okay? Second point is that American leadership, from very early on, knew the war was unwinnable. This was the greatest military in the world. They dropped more bombs in Vietnam in the 60s than all bombs were dropped in World War II, okay? And they could not win the war. And the reason why is, to win a war, you have to solve three problems, okay? Okay? The first problem is clear strategy, okay? What are you trying to accomplish in this country? What are your clear military objectives, okay? Second is, you must adapt to the battlefield, okay? Because all your best plans will change over the course of the battle, okay? So the adversary that is most willing to adapt to the battlefield will win, okay? And the third thing is the will to fight. So if you want to look at a war and who's most likely to win the war, you ask these three questions. One, does this guy have clear military objectives that everyone understands? Because that will determine strategy, okay? Second is this guy adapting to the battlefield? And the third is this guy, does this guy still have the will to fight? If the answer is yes to all three questions, then the person will most likely win the war. Okay, and if you look at the Vietnam War, even though America was killing a lot of people, it killed 3 million Vietnamese during the course of the war. It was not destroying the enemy's will to fight. In fact, it was making them angrier. And therefore, more people were willing to fight the Americans. Okay? So very early on, the American political leadership knew the war could not be won. So then the question then is, Why did America stay in the war? And the answer is credibility. Okay? Credibility just means they didn't want to lose face. They didn't want to be laughed at by the Chinese and by the Soviets and by the Europeans, okay? But there's actually another way to understand credibility, and it's what we call the sunk cost fallacy, okay? Have you guys heard of the sunk cost fallacy? And the idea is never, ever go into a casino. The reason why is that when you go into a casino and you start losing money, at some point, you cannot leave the casino. Why not?
You feel like you lost so much, so now you have to make it back.
Exactly. You want to reclaim the money you've lost, okay? You've invested so much that you cannot leave. You have to get that money back. And that's the problem with war. Eventually, you've invested so much, you cannot leave the war. And that's what happened in Vietnam. America invested so much, it didn't want to leave the war because it did not want to admit that all this has been lost. Okay, it's what we call the sunk cost fallacy. And that's why, even though America could not win the war, it still wanted to fight the war. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so the Vietnam War is another example, okay, that is similar to this, where America invests enough soldiers that it refuses to leave the war and admit defeat, okay? Does it make sense, guys? All right. Now, let's look at one more example. And this is the most recent example, and it's the Russian-Ukraine war. Now, as you know, in February 2022, Putin ordered a special military operation against Ukraine, okay? And this is Ukraine. And Russia attacked from three axes, okay? The north to take Kiev, the capital. You have the east to take Donetsk. And then you have the south from Crimea to take the south, okay? And as we know, the north failed, okay? The north attack failed and the Russians had to turn back. But the east and the south were successful, okay? Now, let's think about this. You have an extremely powerful military attacking your country, the Ukraine. If you were the Ukrainian president, if you were the Ukrainian military, there's really only one way you can fight this war and win. And what is it? Using traditional military doctrine. How must you fight this war? You guys know? Let's go back to mass forces, avoid encirclement, protect supply lines. How must you fight this war? There's only one way you can fight this war. Excuse me? How do you disrupt supply lines? There's only one way you can fight this war and win. And what is it? The enemy is attacking you, right? So what must you do? Okay, the answer is you must retreat. Okay? Why? The enemy is attacking, right? So you pull back your forces. Why would you do that? What's the logic of that?
Because then they have longer supply lines.
Exactly, okay? It's that simple, okay? You want to overextend your enemy. Ukraine is a huge country, right? And Russia didn't send out that many soldiers, maybe 160,000. That's not that many soldiers. So if you just give them space, they're going to outrun the supply lines, okay? And then when they outrun the supply lines, you can encircle them and you can disrupt their supply. And that's the only way you can win the war, okay? What did the Ukrainians do instead? That's the only way to win this war. But what did the Ukrainians do instead, which made them lose the war? Yeah, so the Ukrainians refused to give up space, okay? They refused to give up land. They want to fight the Russians for every inch of territory. And eventually, because the Russians had more forces, mass forces, they were able to push through, okay? So that's the first major mistake that Ukraine made. But then last summer, Ukraine launched something called a counteroffensive, right? So once Russia was able to take space. Because Russia is a land army, it started to develop fortifications, defenses, okay? Mainly artillery. And that 3 lines of defenses. And in the summer offensive, the Ukrainian military, for whatever reason, sent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of soldiers against this artillery, and the Russians blew everyone up, okay? Now, here's a question. Why are the Ukrainians doing this? They've lost the war now, right? They have no more soldiers. Right now, the average age of the Ukrainian army is it's over 40 years old. They have guys in their 60s and 70s fighting in the military. They don't have enough manpower. The war is lost. Why would the Ukrainians do this? First of all, why would they fight for every inch of territory? And why would they launch a counteroffensive against a superior enemy? What's the problem? Okay, the first is their president, Zelensky, the guy's a TV actor, okay? Which means that he doesn't think strategy, he just thinks what looks good on TV. So for the first 2 years of the war, we're watching this on TV, right? And it looked as though the Ukrainians were going to win this war, right? I remember like 2 years ago, people were saying that the Ukrainians are going to march to Moscow and overthrow Putin. People were saying that, okay? And the reason why is that Zelensky is a master of public image manipulation, okay? He was distorting reality for people through television. The problem with that, though, is it's not reality, guys, okay? The reality on the ground is very different from TV, okay? So who else is like Zelensky in this world? Trump is exactly like Zelensky, okay? Do you understand? Trump is also concerned about what looks good on TV. He's like, I must look strong. We must look as though we're winning this war. He doesn't really care about strategy, okay? So because of this, it's very likely that he orders a land invasion of Iran because it would look good on TV, okay? So the problem with Zelensky is he cared about what looked good as opposed to actually what actually worked, okay? But you also have other problems, like you have extremists in the Ukrainian military, okay? And guys, these extremists, they're Nazis, they're neo-Nazis. And so the traditional understanding of Nazis are people who kill Jews, okay? But the Russians don't understand Nazis that way because remember, Germany and the Soviet Union fought this war. So the Russians understood Nazis to be enemies of Russia who want to kill Russians. And there were many neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They hate Russia. They want to kill as many Russians as possible. Okay? And they're the ones who are pushing for as much war as possible. Okay? So you have these extremists in the Ukrainian military. Okay? The last reason is NATO. So it's an open secret that NATO is helping the Ukrainian military against Russia. You have NATO military advisors devising strategy against Russia. Okay, so it's most likely that the summer offensive last summer was a NATO plan and not a Ukrainian plan. It's possible. We also know that NATO special forces are in the country directing missile strikes against Russian forces, okay? Which means what? If this is true, and if Ukraine loses the war, meaning that it doesn't have enough soldiers to continue to fight this war, what will NATO do? Yeah. I mean, according to what happened to Vietnam War and the Athenian expedition against Sicily, it is most likely that the most likely outcome will be that NATO sends its own troops against Russia. Okay, so Macron of France have said that we want to send French soldiers, and the British Prime Minister has said that he is considering conscription for British people. Okay? Which means that young British citizens will be drafted into the army to fight Russia. All right? So these are three historical examples that are very similar to what could happen in Iran. Okay, does that make sense, guys? All right, any questions before I continue? All right, is this clear so far? All right. Now let's use another mode of analysis called game theory analysis, okay? And this is what I've been teaching you this semester. And the idea is that society, what happens in the real world, is a game among human beings. Okay, and each person is trying to play this game as to optimize the outcome for that person. Okay, so the question then is, why would the United States send 100,000 troops into Iran? So let's look at the individual motivations of the individual players, okay? So you have the United States. What does the United States want to do? What does it want to do? By doing what? And accomplishing what? It wants to topple the regime in Tehran, right? And you can only do that through a ground invasion, okay? So the United States is trying to topple Iran. But then you also have other actors, okay? So Iran. What does Iran want to do? What does Iran want to do? Or basically the Revolutionary Guard Corps. What do they want to do? Should we? They want to kill as many Americans as possible, okay? Do you understand? They want to force an American landing invasion, okay? So Iran wants to force a U.S. invasion, knowing that if the U.S. invades, it has to lose the war, okay? It will lose the war because the Revolutionary Guard can just send suicide bombers against the United States, okay? Now let's look at Israel. Okay? We know that the United States wants to topple Iran. We know that Iran wants to force a U.S. invasion to defeat the Americans, to humiliate the Americans, and exact revenge for what happened in the past. Okay? What does Israel want to do? What is Israel's optimal outcome? Do you guys know? If you're Israel, what do you want to happen? Okay, so you want Iran defeated, okay? And then what do you want to happen? You want Iran defeated, you want the proxies defeated, and then what do you want to happen?
Jordan,
Do you want the United States
Turkey.
to stay in the Middle East? What happens if the United States? What happens if the United States and Iran both lose the war? I mean, Iran is destroyed as a country. The United States is destroyed as a military presence in the Middle East. What would happen? Israel becomes the top dog in the Middle East. Do you understand? Okay? Israel can now control the entire Middle East. So the optimal outcome for Israel is Iran and the United States are both destroyed. Okay? Do you understand? How about Saudi Arabia? What is their optimal outcome? Exactly the same as Israel. Exactly. Okay? Do you understand? Okay? Which will leave the Middle East to Saudi Arabia and Israel, but Israel is a far superior military than Saudi Arabia. Okay? Remember, it's very easy to blow up Saudi Arabia. They have oil fields. Okay? Not that easy to blow up Israel. So Israel becomes a top dog. Do you understand game theory? In other words, all the major participants want an invasion of Iran. Okay? But they want different outcomes. And Saudi Arabia and Israel most benefit if this situation happens. where you have 100,000 US troops in the country and they can't get out, okay? Because it becomes sunk cost fallacy. The United States can only pour in more soldiers. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So is this clear to you guys? Okay? You can either use historical analysis to get to this outcome, but you can also use game theory to get to this outcome. Any questions so far? Okay, great, okay. So Celine asked the most pivotal question, okay? The United States has nuclear weapons, which is its ultimate trump card, right? So what Trump can say to Tehran is like, I have 100,000 troops in the country. You have to let them go, or I will nuke you, okay? Do you understand? Trump can say that. Listen, I'm Trump. I'm Donald Trump. I need to look strong. I have 100,000 troops in the country. I can't get them out of the country. So he says to Tehran, you either let them go, okay? You either guarantee him safe passage out of the country, or I will nuke you, right? So that's what will happen. That is what Donald Trump will do. Once the situation arises, the only way for Donald Trump to save face is to threaten Tehran and says, you either let my guys go, or I will nuke the entire country. Right? So, how does Tehran get out of this situation? How do the Iranians protect themselves against this possibility? Because you're absolutely right. This is exactly what will happen if this situation will arise. Trump will respond with nuclear weapons, or the threat of nuclear weapons. So what must the Iranians do to protect themselves against this possibility? Who can help the Iranians now?
Russia.
Russia. Okay, do you understand? So before this war happens, Iran and Russia must come to an agreement where Putin says from the onset, no one is allowed to use nuclear weapons. Okay? If Iran uses nuclear weapons, I will nuke Iran. If the United States uses nuclear weapons, I will nuke the United States. If Israel uses nuclear weapons, I will nuke Israel. Okay? If Putin says that, how will the world react? If Putin says this, you are not allowed to use nuclear weapons, how will the world react? He's a hero, right? He saved humanity. But because he says this, the United States is now trapped. Okay? You understand? And so this becomes a black hole for the United States, where they can only send in more troops. They can't get any troops out. They can only send in more troops. What's the problem with this? What's the problem with sending in more troops? No, there's actually a huge problem with this idea of sending in more troops. What is it? Okay, you can't, no one wants to go fight, you understand? The military cannot recruit soldiers, all right? But even if you did have enough troops, as Jack says, you can't resupply them. Why? Why can't you actually resupply your army? Why not? But there's a bigger problem than the supply lines. What is it? What do you need to create bullets and ammunition? America has no manufacturing capacity because America moved all its manufacturing capacity to China. Okay? Remember this. So for every one ship that America can build, China can build 232 ships. That's what the Pentagon says. Okay, do you understand? So if this war were to happen, there's absolutely no way America can win this war. It's just completely trapped inside Iran. And once it becomes trapped, sunk cost fallacy comes into play, and America just puts in all its resources into the country, but it's a black hole. Okay? It cannot use nuclear weapons because Putin has said from the onset, you are not allowed to use nuclear weapons. All right? But now the question then is, why would Putin do that, right? Why would Putin involve himself in this war? And that's what we'll discuss next class, all right? How Putin sees this war and how Putin will react in this war. Okay? But before we end, are there any questions about any of this? Does this make sense to you guys? Is this clear?
I don't agree with his assumptions here, his opinion.
Any questions?
Like, is it possible for the United States to make
His predictive analysis based on history is better than his game theory.
descendant on these?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So the problem with Iraq is that Iraq is an independent country. Do you understand? There are 10,000 American soldiers in Iraq. So you would need their permission. Even if you had their permission, there's a problem here because there are lots of Shia militiamen in Iraq who are loyal to Iran. Okay, and they would see the American invasion force as something as an opportunity to attack the Americans. Okay, because they're still angry about the Americans for what happened in Iraq. But even if they could have a staging area in Iraq, they still have to deal with mountains. Okay, do you understand? All right. I mean, the problem is you have 100,000 troops in the country. You have to get out of the country. Okay, and it's very hard to get them out of the country. If you go through the mountains, you're gonna get ambush in the mountains. If you go through the air, those drones are gonna strike you down. That's the issue. Okay. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions? Okay, great. So on Friday we'll talk about Putin. Okay.
I'm not in agreement with this guy. Too many assumptions. It'd be
So-
crazy if it comes true, though. Be crazy if it comes true, like he said. Seems like Trump already sees that it's not a good idea to have troops in Iran because they did not bring them in right away. But we'll see. Round two's around the corner. The Iran war is gonna get started up again. Every news article is coming out saying Israel's ready to attack Iran again if it does try to get that nuclear weapon. Same with the U.S., especially with the information coming out that the nuclear facilities were not fully destroyed. I think by September, we'll be back in there. But why would you send in ground troops, 100,000, if you're not thinking that's going to be enough? Hubris? Possible, but I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's probable. And he's underestimating the use of the air superiority. You're not just controlling the air. You're not just stopping missiles. You're not just stopping drones, which some will get through, of course, especially the drones, because they're more difficult to find. But with air superiority, you're going to have your own drones, your own reconnaissance planes. You can see what the military troops are doing. You don't think right away the U.S. is going to be able to tell what Iran's troops movement is looking like and then attack them right away with missiles. I mean, shock and awe is all about that. It's all about taking air superiority and using that air superiority fully to your advantage in every way, shape, and form. Taking out especially with Iran. I mean, Iran has no air capabilities; they just have missiles. You attack the missile sites, take out their abilities to even launch missiles, and then the ones that they do launch, you can bring down a bunch of them. And again, some will get through, but that's how I see that going. And then in terms of Iran's troops, they're just stuck on the ground. So why would you send in ground troops on your own? But then with recon planes, if you see any troop movement, you just send in some bombs right away, missiles. What else do you need? Anyways, very interesting opinions there. I would recommend a few more listens of this guy. His channel's Predictive History. His name, Jiang Xueqin, or Xueqin Jiang, rather, I think. Okay, that's going to be it for today. I will see you guys later. We'll probably get into some John Mearsheimer um, and others. We'll see if we'll do the Nelk Boys, Benjamin Netanyahu reaction, and the Mehdi Hassan Jubilee. We'll see if we do those as well. But that's it for today. See you guys later. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.